All right, let's take a look at another little for loop list routine here. This one's going to be splash damage. So right now you see I got these enemies tightly packed here. The arrow is hitting. It's only taking life off one. What happens if I want to do a little bit of splash damage around all these? And I'm going to do it the long way. I'm going to do it using a loop just to emphasize and practice using our loops. So let's go for that. So let's get started here. I've already coded in the monster gets hit by an arrow that the arrow is destroyed and the hit points of the monster goes down until they reach 0 or below. Now what I'm going to also do here is I'm also going to do a little script. Splash damage. Okay, so this little splash damage script is basically going to pop and run a new script I make here. And this one is going to check all around and see if I have to damage the other units that are nearby. I'll do a little radius of like 200 just to make it very obvious that it's working. Now I'll skip all the documentation of my script here, but we know this is a monster runs this when hit by an arrow. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to find out how many monsters are on the screen. So I'm going to do a little num, and I'm going to go instance find O monster. Whoops, not instance find. I just caught myself there. Instance number O monster. And let's just make that a local variable. I'm going to ask if the number is 0. I'm going to get out of here. There's no point doing anything. Now, assuming I have some monsters, what I want to do now is basically cycle through all the monsters, and I'll start at monster 0, and I'll keep going until I'm under the end of the list there that Gamemaker's keeping track of. And with each monster that I pull out, so let's go a little monster ID is instance find. Let's find monster K. Now that I got the ID of that monster, what I want to do is find out how far away that monster is. So when finding out how far away that monster is, let's just use a little point distance. So let's just use a little distance is point distance from my x and y to MID's x, and that monster's y that I just pulled out of the GameMaker list. And now I just need to ask a question. I'll say if the distance is less than 200, I'm going to do some damage onto this monster. Now, for simplicity's sake, I'll just say that it's always 1 damage, so you can see this thing work. So, how do I take 1 life off of that particular monster MID? I can just do something like this. I can break into a with statement and say with that monster. Let's go hit points. Goes down by 1. And technically, I should also check to see if this monster has run out of hit points. So if HP is less than or equal to 0, instance destroy. Now, usually I like to actually make a script for taking off hit points so you don't have to repeat this kind of code everywhere. But I guess in this case, this will work okay. And that's really it. So if you watch the logic here, set up a loop, pull out the monster, get the distance. If the distance is under 200, with that monster, take a life off, check if they're dead, and if they are dead, destroy them. That's the end of the with, and that's the end of the if, and that's the end of the for loop. Now, there's one little problem here. Let's run it and see if you can spot the one little problem with this. Now, to spot the problem, you actually have to be quite clever. But let's create a few more so there's lots nearby. See if you can figure out what exactly is going wrong here. And if you watch the ones getting hit compared to the ones nearby, you'll see the ones nearby do lose 1 every time, but you'll see here that the one getting hit is actually going down by 2 every time. Now, question for you is, can you figure out why our code is making the one that's getting hit drop by 2 every single time. Part of the problem is involved right here. When we get hit by an arrow, the monster that gets hit by the arrow takes off 1 hit point. But then it calls splash damage, and splash damage jumps here, and it cycles through all the monsters in your room. The problem with that is that the monster that got hit is one of the monsters in the room. And so it's in this list, it gets pulled out, it's within 200 pixels of itself, and it takes 1 hit point off of itself. So one thing you can do here just to sort of to break out of this is you could just do this if you wanted to. It's not the most efficient, but you could say if the distance is less than 200 and the ID of this monster running the code, remember this is a monster running this code, it has an ID. If its ID is not equal to MID, the monster ID you just pulled out. So it's basically saying, hey, if the distance is less than 200 and this isn't myself, right? My ID does not match the ID just pulled out, then you can actually take the life off. So that's a bit of a little tricky, complicated extra here, but that's a simple fix for it. So when you do it now, it actually works really well. Waiting. Let's make a bunch. And you'll see now the ones getting hit only lose 1. Okay, we got to wait for that one to die there. There we go. And you can see now it's just going down by 1. Now, many people with the splash damage ask, well, I don't want ones really far away to get hurt a lot. So how do I do a splash damage that is actually a bit more realistic? Like the farther you are, the less you get hurt. Here's one thing you can do. Okay, and you know this now comes down to a bit more mathematics, right? Whether you like doing little math games or not. But here I've chosen a distance of 200. So here's what I could do. I'm going to make that a variable. Make that variable so it's local. Now the reason I'm making that local, is because I want to use this variable dist inside of this width statement. And if I didn't make it local, it'd be a little harder to use. So I made a local variable dist. Now in here, I'm actually not going to take 1 off. I'm going to do a little equation. And my little equation is going to go something like this. So I'll find out the appropriate amount to take off based on the distance. Now there's lots of different ways to do it. But let's say they're at a distance of 0. I would want that to be a full damage of 1. If they're at a distance of 200, let's say that's the total end. That's basically a damage of 0. And then I want it to just nicely change along the way. And pop, I just did a little typing there to make sure it was right and worked. And here's what I've come up with. I know to get into here, the distance has to be less than 200. So then what I do is I do a little damage equation here. I say take 200 and minus the distance away, and then divide by 200. So pretend that we're at a distance of 0 away. 200 minus 0 is 200, and divided by 200 is 1. So damage is 1, hit points minus 1. Works well. Let's pretend I'm really far away, like 199. 200 minus 199 is 1. 1 divided by 200 is very tiny. Hit points minus very, very tiny amount. And so it ends up working out nicely. So that's a linear damage. Now, if you want to go do a little bit more math there, you can do ones that, have square roots and square patterns and stuff like that. But, that's pretty good for most people's basic games, right? So that's a good idea just to do with your splash damage. And we give this a little test, and you'll see it actually works fairly well. Well, I think it wants that right there. And give it a run. And let's create a bunch. And you can actually see now we're getting decimals off because it's fractions, right? And sure enough, the ones far away are only losing a little, and the ones close by are actually losing a lot more. So it's actually working pretty nice. Anyways, that's a little bit more on the splash damage there than we had to do. The loop was the important part, but hopefully that damage part was a nice little extra bonus for you. Thanks for watching.